One major development going on now involves more to do with Rachel Zegler and her attitude towards South Park Studios and Paramount after learning about what they are planning for their upcoming special called the DEI Special.
The last time I had the dream, I was walking down the school hallway, and that's when I started to notice that something's wrong. Everyone I cared about has been systematically replaced. And finally, I want to scream, and I'm like, why are they replacing every single character with someone who is diverse?
I was scared of it. It was so weird. Those fateful words from Rachel Zegler about the original Snow White didn't just raise eyebrows, they unleashed a firestorm that would engulf Disney's ambitious remake and controversy. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Hollywood's biggest PR disasters, hit subscribe now.
What they're doing, and that is why we hate the diversity, equity, and inclusion casting and writing in movies.
To never miss our latest exposés. What began as yet another Disney live-action remake quickly spiraled into one of the most contentious film productions in recent memory. But how did a beloved fairy tale adaptation become the center of such intense backlash? And what happens when South Park decides to make you their latest target? When Disney announced Rachel Zegler as their new Snow White, the young star was riding high from her breakthrough role in West Side Story. The casting choice immediately drew attention. Some celebrated the Latina actress breaking barriers, while others questioned changing the traditionally pale-skinned character whose
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie, 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
Very name references her complexion, yet it wasn't the casting that truly ignited the controversy. In a fateful interview, Zegler made comments that would haunt the production for years to come. It's no longer 1937, she declared. She's not going to be saved by the prince. She's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be. For millions of fans who treasured the original animated classic, these words felt like a dismissal of everything that made Snow White magical.
Even if everything worked perfectly, it would have been almost impossible for this movie to succeed because you're comparing it to one of the most beloved films of all time and a truly groundbreaking movie.
Magical. The princess who enchanted generations with her kindness and optimism was being rewritten as something unrecognizable. And Rachel Zegler, rather than acknowledging the beloved status of the original, admitted she had barely watched it, finding it weird and describing the prince as a stalker. The internet erupted. Overnight, what should have been a celebrated role for a rising star became a lightning rod for cultural debate. The 1937 Snow White wasn't just
our rights are on the line, folks.
Bitch! The right to buy Cosby sweaters?
Come on.
That's the face of a serial killer.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
Any film. It was Disney's first feature-length animated movie, a groundbreaking achievement that revolutionized cinema. Its songs, characters, and artistry have been cherished for generations. Disney's plan to modernize this treasured classic was always going to be delicate. Behind closed doors, Disney executives envisioned a Snow White for the modern era. One with more agency, more contemporary values, and a story that would resonate with today's audience.
You don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced,
White! He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
Thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry.
But as Zegler's comments spread, fans began to question if this reimagining was actually a complete dismantling. She literally stalked her, Zegler said about the prince in another interview, doubling down on her characterization of the original as outdated. These statements might have been intended to highlight the progressive aspects of the new adaptation, but they landed differently with audience.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That
is
not going to be saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
it?
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Audiences, coming across as dismissive of a beloved cultural touchstone. What made matters worse was the disconnect between the marketing strategy Disney wanted and the messaging their lead actress was delivering. While the studio aimed for a delicate balance between honoring tradition and offering something new, Zegler seemed to be declaring war on the original.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
Fairy tale itself. As public backlash mounted, trouble was brewing behind the cameras. rumors began circulating about friction between Zegler and her co-star Gal Gadot, cast as the evil queen. At industry events, eagle-eyed observers noticed the two barely interacted, avoiding each other.
It was supposed to come out like a year and a half ago, and then we went after them so hard because of their variety of ridiculous sins that they actually went into full-scale reshoots on Snow White when we announced that we had a competitor.
In group settings, and maintaining a palpable distance when forced to share the stage. Sources close to the production whispered that creative differences had turned personal. Zegler supposedly complained that Gadot was stealing scenes with improvised moments that overshadowed the lead role. The tension reportedly became so severe that entire sequences were reshot to appease the increasingly isolated star.
Animated film that had the kind of Disney magic that had depth, that had absolute, it was riveting. And it's based, of course, on a Brothers Grimm story.
What started as whispers soon became impossible to ignore when the pair appeared at a major awards ceremony and refused to acknowledge each other, despite being seated just rows apart. The awkward distance between them seemed to confirm something had gone terribly wrong. Meanwhile, Disney's executives were growing increasingly desperate. The film had already undergone multiple rounds of reshoots, an expensive and telling sign.
This started with the movie star Rachel Zegler, who I believe would be categorized as a loudmouth
kind of trouble. Each new version attempted to salvage a workable third act while balancing Zegler's vision of a revolutionary Snow White with elements traditional enough to appease longtime fans. The budget reportedly ballooned as directors, writers, and producers struggled to find the sweet spot. And all of this was happening during Bob Iger's return to Disney's helm, a CEO who had previously steered the company through smoother waters.
As an actor, you don't get to dictate anything. You don't get to dictate if a film actually happens. You don't get to dictate when it is shot, how it is shot, if you can ever speak about it to the public. You are simply just there to show up and say your lines and look the way they want you to look.
Now facing a perfect storm of controversies just when the studio's box office dominance was already showing cracks. Just when it seemed the controversy might be contained, South Park entered the picture. The animated show, infamous for its no-holds-barred approach to contemporary issues, aired an episode featuring an unmistakable parody of the Snow White situation. The satire was brutal and precise. The animated caricature of Zegler was portrayed as berating everyone around her, voicing over-the-top criticisms of the 1937 film.
God forbid a woman dream about true love. We're all just sitting around here, maybe I could be president one day. I hate men, I just want to be president. That screams Disney princess. Oh my God, I'm literally getting enraged. Once again, I feel like I'm back in 2022.
And proclaiming that the new production was about saving society, all while ignoring the opinions of co-stars and fictional Disney executives. In one particularly cutting scene, the Snow White character has a meltdown when she discovers the evil queen is stealing her spotlight. Within hours, the parody went viral. Clips circulated on every social platform, with viewers pointing out parallels to real interviews Zegler had given. Hashtags like Snow White fiasco and Rachel Zegler began trending alongside references to Disney's leadership struggle.
Yeah, the entire film's about a love story. It's about a love story because that's what the point of the film is. And I'm sorry that chivalry and a man pursuing you is now deemed as stalking, which now it's kind of making sense why men are opting out of the dating scene.
Sources close to Zegler revealed she was livid about the portrayal, feeling blindsided and unfairly mocked. The comedic take felt, from her perspective, like a cruel exaggeration painting her as an unhinged diva who despised the original Snow White. Some suggested she considered issuing a statement to clarify her stance on the 1937 classic, but Disney allegedly pressured her to remain silent, fearing any response would only amplify the controversy. The damage was done. What had been an industry controversy now became mainstream fodder, with South Park.
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. I watched it for the first time in probably 17 years.
Park's satirical lens bringing the entire fiasco to audiences who might otherwise have been only vaguely aware of the drama. As the situation spiraled, Disney's response only made matters worse. In the weeks following the South Park episode, numerous talk show appearances and promotional segments featuring Zegler were abruptly canceled. Official statements cited scheduling conflicts or unforeseen adjustments, but industry insiders insisted. The real motivation was panic. The studio desperately wanted to prevent further.
The original production, I was scared of it. Oh, it was so weird. It was a stalker. Like, I feel like if you are taking on the most iconic Disney role ever. Genuinely, like, this was the most prolific Disney film. I feel like you should kind of have some sort of reverence for the original production.
Other inflammatory remarks. A planned Saturday Night Live performance in costume was scrapped. A rumored musical showcase at Disney World never materialized. Each cancellation fueled further speculation. Was Disney silencing its own star? This apparent strategy to minimize Zegler's public exposure created new tensions. Reports emerged that the actress felt abandoned by the studio, left to weather the storm of criticism without support. Her representatives allegedly considered this pattern of cancellations a potential violation of contractual promotional guarantees, with some sources suggesting legal action was quietly being contemplated. Behind closed doors, Disney executives held crisis meetings almost daily. The nightmare scenario was unfolding. A production meant to be a surefire success was becoming a cautionary tale of how not to handle a beloved property.
In addition to that, there was already an uproar about her being cast as Snow White because she is not Caucasian. She is a Latina. She is half Colombian. And so people were like, why were you cast in the first place? We just had a black Little Mermaid. Now we're having a Latina Snow White, and she is literally called Snow White. This doesn't make sense.
Bob Iger, who had built his reputation on deftly navigating corporate challenges, found himself unable to contain a controversy that seemed to grow more complex with each passing day. For industry observers, Disney's paralysis was almost as fascinating as the controversy itself. The once meticulous approach to brand management appeared to be crumbling under pressure, with each new development widening the rift between the studio and its star. The Snow White meltdown quickly became a case study in the perils of reboot culture. When studios revisit iconic properties, they walk a treacherous line, innovate too boldly, and risk alienating devoted fans, adhere too closely to tradition, and face accusations of creative stagnation. Rachel Zegler's approach to Snow White had clearly fallen into the former category, championing a radical reimagining that many viewed as dismissive of the originals. Magic. Yet, her stance reflected a broader trend in Hollywood. The push to update classics for contemporary sensibilities, often by subverting the very elements that made them beloved in the first place. For Disney, the implications were particularly severe. After a string of underperforming remakes and box office disappointments, Snow White was supposed to demonstrate that the studio's live-action strategy still had merit. Instead, it became emblematic of a disconnect between creative ambition and audience expectation. For Zegler herself, the controversy threatened to overshadow her undeniable talent. What should have been a career-defining role was becoming a potential career liability. Casting directors and producers were surely watching to see how she navigated this scrutiny. Would she emerge as a principled artist standing by her vision, or would the fallout from Snow White follow her to future projects? Industry veterans noted that Hollywood can be forgiving when box office numbers are strong, but less so when controversy outweighs commercial success. The comedic immortalization by South Park only complicated matters, cementing a public image that might prove difficult to shed. As release day approached, the Snow White remake had become more famous for its troubles than its merits. The perfect storm of factors, an outspoken lead actress seemingly at odds with the source material, rumored conflicts with co-stars, a studio in damage control mode, and the viral lampooning by a popular animated series, created a narrative that overshadowed any potential artistic merit. Could the final film somehow transcend all this drama? Occasionally, productions plagued by behind-the-scenes chaos still find redemption through quality storytelling, captivating performances, or visual splendor. If audiences were treated to breathtaking sequences and emotional depth, perhaps word of mouth could salvage Snow White's reputation. Yet with each new twist, another canceled appearance, fresh rumors of on-set tensions, additional comedic jabs from late-night shows inspired by the South Park parody, that scenario seemed increasingly unlikely. The conversation had shifted permanently from what the film might be to the spectacle surrounding it. For Disney, Rachel Zegler, Gal Gadot, and everyone else involved, the ultimate question became whether Snow White would be remembered for its creative vision, or as the project that demonstrated how quickly a high-profile remake could derail when studio and star lose alignment, and when satirists decide to immortalize that disconnect. Only time and box office returns would provide definitive answers. But one thing was certain. The Snow White meltdown had become a cautionary tale of how not to reimagine a classic, a perfect storm of creative differences, corporate panic, and public relations disasters that threatened to bury the very magic the original fairy tale had promised. In the competitive landscape of Hollywood reboots, no amount of wishful thinking could erase what had become one of the most publicized pre-release controversies in recent memory. And somewhere, the creators of South Park were likely already planning their next episode.